Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shills, death slayers, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks, robots. I'm Useful Idiot. Welcome, and let's go global and talk about automation and robots again. And I want to give a hat tip to one of my longtime regulars and friends, Apagugu, who sent me a lecture that was right in line with a lot of things I've talked about as far as automation and job replacement and robots and artificial intelligence and the like. And so it's been a favorite topic. And I wish I'd had this information in some of my other videos, but actually it's worked out rather well because there's so much information in this lecture that it certainly deserves its own video. And I'm going to attach the lecture below. It's very good. The lecture goes by really fast, has lots of great information, and is well worth watching. So let's get into it. So anyway, it's once again, the whole idea that in the future there's going to be a huge shift, and it will be different this time. And this guy goes even a little bit further, talking about the fact that this is really going to change the quotient in a big way. And he talks about the fact that the petroleum and energy industry and auto ownership and everything associated is going down a path that there'll be no return, and it will change things dramatically. And he has a even more dramatic view than I do, talking about the potentiality of 70 million transportation jobs lost globally. And of course, I think I've talked about 3 million being lost in the United States from those jobs. But we're talking about everything from transportation and trucking to taxis and everything else. And so in this case, like I say, the gas vehicle will be eliminated, and with it will go a lot of jobs and other huge paradigm shifts that are associated with it, and that's where it gets interesting. So a gas vehicle has 2,000 plus moving parts. An electric vehicle has 18 moving parts, and so that's one of the things I brought up in other videos, and why a lot of auto executives and specialists feel that in the future electric vehicles are going to be a boon for a lot of sectors, but as far as creating jobs, it will not be. And the fact is that a lot of it will be constructed by robots. So there will be very few human jobs ultimately involved in the auto industry producing electric vehicles. So you can see immediately the global impact of the global auto industry is huge, and then everything associated with it. And that's where it gets really interesting for me in this lecture, and some of the stuff that I didn't include in other videos, and that's that there'll be a huge change in the parts industry. Think about the fact that 18 moving parts in an electric vehicle, and in a whole different radical construction. There's an entire swath of parts industry globally that's going to be eliminated, and the same thing goes with the whole maintenance industry associated with the combustion engine and gas vehicles and their 2,000 plus moving parts. When you get in electric vehicles, the entire maintenance industry will be eliminated. One of the pluses, of course, is we're going to have a vast infrastructure, but there'll be a bright future for the construction of a new infrastructure. But a lot of the old infrastructure, once again, is going to be antiquated and lost when we move to electric vehicles. And gas cars are getting to the point now where they can't compete. When you look at the Tesla and vehicles like that, we've already reached we're very close to the ultimate tipping point where gas cars just can't compete at all. And as my friend Apagugu pointed out in an article I've read since then, you can't even really call them cars anymore, automobiles. They're auto computers, they're rolling computers, and so that's another drastic change in this industry. So there'll be a lot of more technology, obviously, associated with cars, and so we'll see all new technologies. But right now we're looking at 2020. Everyone is talking about 2020 as a tipping point. And as I brought up in different videos, on the one hand, it seems like they're talking about 2020 to 2025 when electric vehicles and self-driving vehicles will completely take over. And there seems to be different schools of thought. There seems to be a good argument that I did a video on, that there's a lot of hype involved in when exactly these electric cars, and particularly self-driving cars, will take over. But once again, I'm on the fence, seeing how quickly technology is advancing. It really could be within the framework with another 10 years. And then once again, needless to say, if you have the electric vehicle out there, it's going to have a huge impact on the petroleum industry right at the time when we're finding a lot of new sources. And there's a global glut now, and the prices dropped. So an interesting convergence right now. So peak oil discussions will probably have to be shelved for some time now if we have a reconfigured petroleum industry servicing everything but cars and other forms of transportation that will be electric now. And so we'll have automakers and computer companies interfacing. We have a lot of that already. We have a lot of technological companies like Google and investing heavily in robotics, particularly self-driving electric cars. So we're going to see a lot more of that. And so there'll be a blurred line between Google and GM, I guess, in the future. But needless to say, self-driving vehicles will have lower accident rates theoretically. So auto insurance potentially could be a huge industry that's affected. The guy in this video talks about the idea that car ownership will be a thing of the past. People won't even own cars anymore, and parking will be obsolete because if people aren't owning cars and they basically just get in cars, go to self-drive to the spot they want and get out, then parking will be obsolete. So there'll be an entire global effect on parking theoretically. And then the whole idea that there'll just be less cars out there if they're more efficient and people can use them this flexibly. And then by 2030, supposedly 100% of global energy could be potentially solar, and that includes what's used to power a lot of these cars. And so petroleum, gas, nuclear, coal are all going to be heavily affected. And so that's one of the things to think about. As Basquiat said, you have to look at the seen and the unseen. But, excuse me, Basquiat, and in this case, there's a huge amount of ripple effects going through a whole bunch of different industries if we're going to advance into electric vehicles and self-driving cars a lot faster than people think, and it's going to be huge. And like I say, it certainly ties in with everything I've talked about a lot of jobs are going to be disappearing. They're not coming back, and robotics are going to be moving into more and more areas. And of course that gets into the whole idea of the universal basic income, which always seems to be popping up simultaneously right now in articles and videos about robotics. And I've attached another video I watched recently, James K. Boyce talking about the universal basic income and whether there'll be an incentive to work, and bringing up some good points about the fact that we've already got some universal basic income in some places like Indian reservations, and also Alaska citizens getting a cut of the oil industry up there. And we have global models as well, like Norway, where citizens reap the benefits of the oil industry there. But I'm not entirely sold on James K. Boyce's views on universal basic income, because he wants to fund it with what he calls universal assets and the public legacy. So things would have to change a lot for things to be funded by what he calls universal assets and the public legacy. In other words, he's talking about funding universal basic income with carbon tax and a financial transaction tax and taxes on extracting practices like the oil industry. So going after the same targets to fund these things, and but he also talks about the fact that it wouldn't be a living wage per se, and that's one of the more interesting propositions I've seen. Most discussions of universal basic income seem to talk about a little bit more money than what this guy's talking about. He's talking about only $300 billion a year going into this program, which of course it would never be $300 billion a year. If he extrapolates that it's going to be $300 billion a year, then it's actually going to be $900 billion a year by the third or fourth year. And he talks about how it won't drain the economy, which is also laughable. But he's talking about only $200 per person per month. So in that sense, yeah, it wouldn't be an incentive to not work and cause a slacker society. And when you talk about $200 per person per month, it's hard to even understand why that would be an effective program. by any stretch, depending on whatever direction you're coming from, thinking about universal basic incomes. But so if you had a family of four, theoretically you could get $800 a month, and I suppose maybe there are sectors of society that could make something like that work, and then they can work at low skilled, low pay jobs elsewhere and still be able to make ends meet. So in essence, this interpretation of universal basic income becomes a lot like welfare, and certainly the way of funding it is not that realistic. So anyway, there we go. I encourage anyone that has the time to watch this this lecture. And once again, hat tip to Appa Gugu. And there's some great information, and I gave you a lot of it right now. I'm useful, don't you be one too?